Good afternoon, happy Friday, and happy New Year. Welcome to the first game episode of 2023 here on Pax8 Live. The Pax8 Live show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of in the past week, or in this case, the past couple of weeks. As always, I've got Matt with me, and we've got two amazing guests today. So let's not waste any time, and we'll jump straight into the news.
All right,
Captain.
welcome back. If you're following along the beard progress, I have now covered my chin predominantly since the last
coming,
time you saw me.
You can't count them
Yeah.
anymore, so you know it's getting better.
I can count the white ones easier. It seems like anyway. But yeah, no, it's there. All right, brother. Listen, let's get into this first article. We've been off for a little while. A lot of things happened over the holidays. I know everybody was able to watch that we had a successful end of the year without a major incident on an MSP. Like, that's a win, in my opinion. We wrapped up the year without one of those massive ones in the supply chain, which is fantastic. But we do have a few things that we want to talk about. So Security Boulevard, Dom, it seems like you might have brought your auditors today, so I will be on my P's and Q's today for sure. Yeah. No worries, man. Listen, so GitHub got hacked. If you haven't seen this yet in the news, this happened a little while back where they were made aware of this in late December, that they had a code repository compromised, and that raw source code of several components of things they used in their private repo were compromised and taken, and just basically saying incidents, right? And I think you're going to notice a theme through our news articles today that is going to set you up for what we want to talk about if the title didn't already give it away, right? But GitHub had a response plan. We actually got data from them about this within 7 days, give or take. I mean, right? This has only been since late December when they were notified of it till now. And they were able to say with their monitoring tools and capabilities that, hey, nothing was taken of any merit, right? We didn't have some of our key source code, no private customer data was touched. They had that kind of stuff. And, the question I'd ask for you is, Dom, how many MSPs do you think have the capabilities to, within that 5-day turn time, get through a plan, figure out what their comms can be, and actually say, we know we're good, this is our next steps? Like, how many MSPs do you think right now have an incident response plan that would be able to do that right there?
I've not met any, put it that way. It's fair. Yeah, I've not met any. So based on the data available to me, 0. But I'm sure there's at least one, right? Like, I would hope. Yeah. At this stage in the game.
When I was noodling this, I said 2 or 3%. Some of the gentlemen coming on today had an opinion. We'll get that from them as well. But I think if you really broke it down to how many MSPs have actionable incident response plans, and we'll get into what that means later, I think it's probably less than 2 or 3%. I really believe that. So good to see that they didn't have that, and that they were able to close that out real quick. Now let's talk about one that didn't go so well. Everybody remembers this from late in the year. Rackspace was compromised. They didn't ever really say exactly what happened. They were muddy-mouthed about most of the time of what the extent of the damage was in their network and what the extent of restoration capabilities are there. They never really said much of that throughout this whole process. And they now have announced on several different places in the last couple of days that they are discontinuing their mail service, and they are pushing people to Office 365. And they were already in the plans of doing that conveniently. If you read this article, though, Dom, and I just want to get your gut reaction. Yeah, right. Oh, you helped us along with business. Thank you. But on this article, one of the things they talk about, and I want your opinion on this, is they didn't choose from December of 2021 till today to do with anything other than the compensatory controls that Microsoft said may work through any of the proxy logon, through any of the proxy shell, proxy not shell, through any of those iterations. They were left with a chained remote code execution that was possible. And their only reach out in that was to blame Microsoft and say, you didn't let us know there was a chained execution path that would have made this more significant for us than if there wasn't this chained path. So what are your thoughts on just this whole quagmire?
It's bad. I mean, it's bad. Like, if there's going to be a museum of like cybersecurity history, which I think there should be, maybe we should open that. Rackspace gets like a whole wall because there's just so many examples of how this went wrong before, during, and after this incident. It's quite historic in my opinion, and I don't think I've seen something this bamboozled in this high profile of a fashion since, I guess maybe Equifax and the whole Apache Struts problem. But this is bad, and to actively make a decision not to do the right thing, right? Like
Well,
it
and
would
but
appear
they
that
had connection issues, Dom. They said that they
yeah,
did try to do the
yeah,
patching, but they had some connection issues because customers wouldn't upgrade. And so they made the decision that was in best interest for all those customers to not patch, right? And I think that's the one that stands out to me
yeah.
the most is just,
It's just wild to
yeah.
me. Like I don't even know what else to say about it. And if I was a key party to one of these class actions, I would certainly be adding some counts to the indictment because um, it's gross and willful negligence, and whatever the legal term is, maybe we'll ask Tyler next week, for actively deciding that you are not going to take the appropriate remediation action. And it came out a while back that the remediations that were put out are not fully effective, right?
Yep,
It's
that was
been put
wildly
out
known.
clear as day that these are not effective remediations and that you cannot count on them. So yeah, I mean, if I'm a plaintiff in this, I feel like I just got a ton more ammunition. But I think it goes to show, like, you have to find solutions so that you can patch the software. And if that means go all to your, what was it, 30,000 customers, that means go talk to 30,000 customers about upgrading Outlook or whatever needs to happen. You got to go do that, right? Like
Yeah,
sometimes you
yeah.
got to swallow a big pill in cybersecurity.
Yeah, 100%. Good OPSEC. Yeah. You know, one of the things that also comes to mind on this when you're talking about it is really just that choosing profit over the choice to cut something back or to carve something out, and it typically wins, right? I also think that in this, when you look at it, some of the things, bringing it back to that incident response kind of conversation, they didn't clearly have a great incident response capability. There was muddy communications. They never really calmed very well effectively. They obviously didn't have great backup resources. Obviously, they've not talked about being able to restore anyone's data. They had to rebuild an environment completely, which means either that environment from an AD perspective was completely pwned, and they had no ability to roll back, and they had no ability to do that, which, you know, with Exchange is kind of hard, right? Rollback on
Right.
time is really tough in Exchange. And so you have all these challenges that they just weren't prepared for, and they didn't do any compensation. And to your point, the thing you did bring up was lawsuits. Before the paint was even wet on this, there were 3 civil class action lawsuits in formation. I would have to imagine, as we see this play out with this kind of data, we could see some very interesting landmark cases made in the legal aspect of this that set precedents for other things that haven't existed. So
Dude, this is
I
gonna
genuinely,
be
yeah.
a commercial this time next year. Like it's just
Right.
gonna be huge, right? And I'll be honest, and I might get slapped on the hand for this one, but if I'm a Rackspace customer, let's say I didn't use Hosted Exchange, given their operational practices around one of their longest standing services, because they've been doing it since Hosted Exchange was cool and new,
Sure.
how do you trust them to do any business together? Like this wasn't a short term, like, oh, we were gonna
Yeah.
deploy the patch tomorrow and it was bad timing. This was like, no, we're just not gonna do this. Like it's too difficult, so we're not gonna. That operational decision shows such a lack of maturity and understanding within the organization. It just blows me away, right?
Yeah.
I'm stunned at what came out. Like I was really honestly rooting for them in the beginning of this. Like, man, that sucks. They got pwned. But some of the
Well,
decisions
and
that
this is
come
the
out.
good now. Now hold on. So this is the just exposition of this, and this is why I wanted to talk about
Sure.
incident response from an MSP lens. Is that you're starting to see haves and have-nots around what the cyber operation looks like from the outside easily, right? If you start looking at Cisco and when they had their incident, they absolutely had immediate comms, instantly talked about that, knew what the rails were, how much was dealt with, what their risk was, almost instantly. I mean, 4 or 5, 6 days. Same thing with what we just saw on GitHub. And then you have, you know, not to bring any political charge that comes with it, but look at Twitter's record on that. Look at how bad some of those incident response capabilities are. Well, now imagine you're in the lens of an SMB who has been sitting there forever saying, my MSP has my security, right? My buddy from CISA is starting a new push to try to talk about OT with SMBs and do OT 800-82 Rev 3 audits.
At
And
what's
say, hey,
OT?
listen, operational technology. Oh, thank you, Dom. Operational technology.
I got you.
If it can move something, if it can open something, if it can turn something on, it's probably OT under the new definition in Rev 3.
So like
And
Alexa. in your
As
house.
extensible to being able to turn the windows open,
Yes.
or to unlock the front doors, or open my garage door. Those become OT in that concept, right? In that conversation.
Right.
My electric toaster with IP on it, right? That can now make heat.
Yeah.
And the reason for it is they see attacks coming that aren't ransomware, that might be killware, where we are giving you denied access to a building for a ransom, denied access to operational capabilities, or changing those things. So that's what they're trying to do. And so they're starting down that path. And what's funny is I happen to be in the middle of a triangle. They went to one of my friends, who's also my attorney, and he called me and he said, Matt, my former MSP does all that, right? No. Not many MSPs have written policies or procedures that they're following. Not many MSPs even have an incident response plan, let alone a system security plan, or one that's extensible to their customers, right? And I don't mean that to be negative. It's not just been part of our world. And so when we look at this, MSPs that start to develop that have those conversations with their customers are going to be in a better position than the ones that don't. And as we look at these companies getting compromised, we look more negatively on the ones that have no data, that give muddy-mouthed answers, that leave services off, and the ones that go, this is what happened, this is what I know, we acted quick, we had a process, we followed it, yes, we failed, we'll fix it next time. What a difference in the way you see them.
Right.
And I think
it's that
why
humility that you have to bring into the equation. Everybody is going to get pwned. It's just, I've been pwned, you've been pwned.
Me too.
It's going to happen, right? Like, but when you try to put this veil on it, or just straight up don't communicate,
or don't know because you have no capabilities,
or don't
it's
know,
evident,
right? But even if they said they didn't know, like, I would have given them a little more, like,
true.
I don't know the word for it. I would have been a little less.
It would have been a lighter heart about it, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
All right. We're going to touch quickly on this one just because it's in the same theme.
That's enough.
There was a hack.
Rackspace.
I know we did. I feel terribly great about it. So, all right. So this is about a health firm. They were a tangential data partner. They're listed as a BA actually in this incident for most of these partners. So they provide services to health partners, and they were compromised. 271,000 patients made the wall of shame. I just want to remind everyone that this is becoming more and more in the public eye. You're seeing it, right? You're seeing these things become there. And in their case, I would probably bet, based on reading this, they had a fairly decent incident response plan on the time of response and the time of closing this out, and the time of disclosure happened really quickly to DHS. They actually had that within a few days in disclosure if you go look at the DHS website. So haves and have-nots again. Last one's an article about the impact, right? And this one was an article from a company that had been working an incident with an attorney. Their company was down for almost 2 weeks, impacting trials potentially, and filings and day-to-day operations and communications and all the things. And one of our friends, who's actually going to be with us here in a little bit, is a subject matter expert who was not on this case, so he's not sharing public data or non-public data about a customer, but he was asked as a subject matter expert as to the impact of this. And when you look at, a lot of law firms want to have their same suite of tools in their hands in the courtroom. They're going to use Horizon View from VMware, or they're going to use Citrix. And what is the impact of complete compromise of their environment and not being able to access case materials when you're in a trial, or you have a hard date you can't miss, and you just have a lot of these things that come into play long-term down the road. But this is another one of those. And when people say it doesn't impact me, they're going to find more and more ways to impact your ability to do business. If you say, hey, you know what? I'm only a retail shop. Great. We're going to disable your ability to open the front doors. You can't sell stuff you can't get in. Right. We'll take out your e-commerce. You can't, right? You'll start seeing these denial methodologies that all play into, kind of that kind of impact for businesses. It doesn't just stop at ransomware. It continues to evolve. So having a good incident response plan is big and critical. The last thing I'll leave with this before we cut over is that when we think about security today, I think we're broken. Because in the world, everybody talks about advertisement of protection. Well, if you look at NIST, it's identify, protect. That's 2, as I count them, right? And then it's detect, respond, and recover. And more about incidents are about how quickly I can detect something and reduce the risk, how fast I can respond, how well I can respond to contain the risk and to reduce its impact, and how well I can recover from that and move back into some level of resiliency and functionality and movement. And that last article speaks to where business can be massively impacted just in the throes of dealing with that based on how good you are at incident response and what you've done. And so that's the call to action today. But let's go to Robin Harris real quick, and then we'll cut back with our awesome guests that we have lined up for you.
So here's something we need to think about. Criminals can easily start targeting the executives and the management and the key decision makers within your company, because it's not hard to find out who these people are. All they need to do is go on LinkedIn or go to your company website, and it's very easy to get people's email addresses. And they'll actually start targeting those people, but they can also use it for social engineering by pretending to be those people because they have a little bit of knowledge of those people, and they can pretend like they're that person and reach out and do social engineering to get your team members to do things they should not do. So you want to have a process in place and a really good communication between your executives and management and staff. I'm not going to send you an email and ask you to give me a credit card number. I'm not going to send you an email and say, remind me what this password is or whatever. We need to have those types of conversations and those kinds of processes in place so that when the scammers try to exploit those high-level positions and their authority and their influence, they won't get past smart employees.
And John asks me for Apple gift cards all the time. I keep telling him,
3 times
get your
this
own
week.
Apple gift cards, John. Yeah.
It's so surprising he doesn't get angry at you when you push back like that. Like, it's very strange how that functions. Yeah. No, I love that. And it is very sage advice, right? Oftentimes people talk about the human element as being the weakest link, but it actually is our front line of defense. In fact, they usually get it right 99 times out of 100. It's the one we get screwed over, right? And so it's about setting those parameters and pre-talking about what we can expect and what you can't, which is a pretty decent segue into why an incident response plan. So Dom, before we kick over to our guests, what's an incident response plan? What's an IR plan? Help me understand
that. It's what you're going to do when things aren't going right? That's the easiest summation of it, right? You understand that something's going to go wrong for you at some point. So you've built, in an ideal world, what you're going to do in response to that, right? And hopefully you've built in some contingencies for when things aren't going as you expect in said incident response plan. And then the idea is that you practice that. You drill it and it becomes some level of muscle memory. So when shit does hit the fan, you break out said incident response plan, and you start working it. And hopefully you've practiced it enough that you're taking some of that stress off of yourself, which for me has been the biggest benefit of ever following an IR plan. Is I understand what my mission is and what the mission of the people I'm controlling are, so that we can advance and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, you've nailed it on the head. It's about how do we respond to something? And it's because what people don't realize is when they get in that moment, it's chaotic. When you get in that moment and it's big enough and it matters enough, it's traumatic. I mean, to put it in its best terms. And I've personally lived through it. And I wanted to bring on some people that live through it every day sometimes because they're not very smart, and some people that live through it and have lived through it in their own lens. So let's bring on the latter. Robert Cioffi is a MSP friend of mine that I sit as the co-chair. You are the chair officially today of the Volunteer Response Corps. Congratulations for CompTIA.
Well, congrats to you too as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it. Co-chair doesn't do near as much as chair, as I understand it, I hope. But
oh, no, it's the other way around. I'm a great delegator.
Oh, dang it. and Robert, let's get Chris introduced as well. Chris is with Solis. You are basically a security expert, but also incident response company that deals with this from insurance panel as well as direct business a lot. So, Robert, your background, of course, I'll let you tell it, but I won't tell it for you. Mind helping everybody know why this matters to you so much?
Sure. So I run an MSP called Progressive Computing out of Yonkers, New York, which is just north of New York City, if you know the area at all. But we're kind of lost in the shadow of New York City. Well, Yonkers is a city of 200,000 people, so it's not a small place, but by New York City metro standards, it's tiny. Sure. But my company was the victim of, or one of the victims of the Kaseya July 2, 2021 attack. So the perpetrators had infiltrated our Kaseya VSA server and used it to deploy Revel No Kibi to approximately 2,500 endpoints, which is about 100% penetration for our customers. 80 customers, 200 sites, 4 time zones, 250 servers, blah, blah, blah. So it was a very painful experience for us to go through.
Yeah. And Chris, you live this on a fairly day-to-day basis. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's daily. No breaks. Yeah, daily, day-to-day basis. Mainly in the SMB space. Obviously, just like you said earlier in the show that we didn't see any of those big MSP type attacks, but when those do happen, I get involved in those as well. But see it all the time, multiple ways, different industries, more profit, nonprofit, you name it. I've probably seen it.
Yep. Well, and what I wanted to
shout
talk
out
about
to Chris, because he was sitting in the green room and he noticed something on his whiteboard that probably wasn't supposed to be broadcast with us today and got up and erased it. So
I also noticed my last name is misspelled. So
nice. So 2 points.
Shame, yeah.
This sucks. So now Chris gets 2 points. He gets 1 point for the OPSEC.
Right.
And can we? Are we sure we can't beat up on Rackspace more? Yeah,
we can. We'll get to it.
We can. Yeah, anyway, we can. Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, they're my bad.
Tell me how to spell it real quick. I'll fix it.
Just fix E and the H. Just change that E and the H out. It's LOEHR.
Doing it live.
We do this live, boys and girls. That's how we roll.
That's a good incident response plan right there.
That is. But I will say, to the point Dom was trying to make, watching you catch that and do it is always warming, because it is part of our world as MSPs. You have to remember, especially as you go more and more live and you do more and more of these presentations, don't leave your client's information back there, and be OPSEC, operationally secure, be aware of your surroundings. So good on you.
It sucks because I don't think I can get seen on LinkedIn on people's fancy new shiny desks that they needed to show off. Full 1040 just sitting right there. Like, come on.
Come on, bro. Give it a minute. But the topic we wanted to those topics, them topics. I'm already negative at the point. But the topic we wanted to touch is what's wrong right now today. Robert, I'm gonna ask you first. In your gut, how many MSPs have the following? A incident response plan that has names in it, communication structures, what people are going to do, and it has been used either in a tabletop or it has been used with incidents inside their own organization and is a real plan that's being followed. What do you think the percentage of MSPs in the world today is? Or limited to North America? I don't care. Pick your state. What's the percentage?
So I know Chris and I are a little bit off on opinion on this, but that's okay because, we're just making stuff up. No, I'm only kidding. I think the number is around 3%. Only because you use the word "and" in there quite a number of times, right? That they have
no ors.
Plan, right? And it's been tabletopped, and or they may have
used it,
battle tested it through an actual incident. It's easy to go online or ask friends in peer groups, "Hey, can I get your plan?" And I've done it. Like I did it years ago. I downloaded plans, looked at them, created something, filled in some blanks, filed it someplace, and that was that. So I would not be included in that 3% simply because I also didn't battle test it or I didn't tabletop it.
So even if we took away some of those ands, what do you think the numbers are as your conjecture real quick on that? I'd probably still put it under 15% that actually have a written plan that they've even done that with.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely under 15% that actually have a plan. I think there's a lot of people thinking about it and they've put some thought or effort into it, but I don't think it's more than 15%.
Well, it's unfortunately, slight sidetrack here. It's unfortunately very prevalent in the MSP space in general. Like if you go to our MSP and search like contract, how many people are asking for someone else's contract from a completely different state or country that they're going to use as their MSA just by Control F and replace, right? Like I used to reply to those back when I was running the shop, and I was like, well, first I went to a lawyer and I told them what kind of business I want to do, and then I said, this is the kind of agreement I need, and they're like, oh, that costs money. I was like, yeah, but I'm probably way better legally protected than you are. And it caused a shitstorm, frankly. Like everyone was mad at me for saying that. And it's the same thing. Like, hey, I need an IR plan. It's like, great. I know nothing about your environment. I don't know what kind of incidents you're open to. Right. Like,
yeah,
it's just,
well, and that's a great call out. You know, I built a incident response plan so I was also in the Soda no Kibi camp with Robert. We happened a little bit earlier. It was about a year before. It was before they egress data, so we didn't actually have to announce it either, which I know Robert kind of fell in that same category because they didn't egress data in that specific incident. But
They
that
claimed
said,
they did. They told me
they claimed they
specifically
did.
and I called them on it. And you know, not a lot of people know that, but behind the scenes during that Kaseya attack, because I had other Soden cases, I was in direct contact with them and conversing with them behind the scenes, and obviously relaying that information to law enforcement and such. And so it was real interesting that you say that. Not to do a little sidebar here, is their story was that they did egress data, and there was absolutely no evidence of that. And
thank God.
Thank God.
Right?
No, because if they did, all they had to do was pick one. And there was some big fish in there. There was some really big non-MSP fish that were also in there that were Kaseya direct customers that were affected. And so, yeah, that was an ugly one. But keep going. Sorry.
Well, no, I think it's a great addition to this, in that people need to understand in an incident, the biggest thing you're trying to solve from a forensics perspective, in my opinion, was data in a breach status or not? Because it changes how you respond. It changes
B word is
what
a
you
big
do.
word. Like you have to be very careful with the use of that word. But when it's time to use it, you need to use it and act on it, right? And seek
and
legal
report
counsel about
and
these
notify
things.
and seek counsel.
And I should back up a little bit. I'm not saying
Sure.
don't ask your peers or don't seek out templates to start with, but make sure you're truly making it your own. Like going back to the agreement example, I might take someone's MSA and then go to my attorney and say I want something like this, but you have to do your own work on your IR plans, on your contract, on everything, right? So that you can be sure it's tailored to what you're going to be dealing with and the resources that you have to deal with them. Otherwise, you will fail at step 0 of that IR plan.
And I believe that the IR plan is armor in the future, even in the near future. It's going to be about how well you actually followed what you said you were going to do in the heat of the moment and what you were able to accomplish. It comes back to reasonableness, right? As we talk about this, was that person behaving reasonable in this situation? Well, if I'm following a well-tested, well-planned document that sucks, it's much more reasonable than saying, I don't know, we just reacted as we went. And it comes into that concept of making it your own makes it more reasonable. If you're just taking a template and there's no way you could even do the stuff on that template, then that's unreasonable, right?
Well, it's the same thing as policy, right? It's the same thing as policy, right? You have a policy, you better follow that policy, because if it gets sued and they call that policy into question and you can't defend the fact that you're actually following what that policy says, you're going to be in trouble. And it's no difference with the IR plan. If you have an IR plan and you don't follow it, and you get sued and the attorney gets a hold of that IR plan because that's discoverable and says, well, your IR plan said this, but you did that, you're going to look like a total fool. So if you have an IR plan that doesn't reflect what you are and what you do, then you're just wasting your time and everybody else's time with it.
So that's solution 1. If you are going to get a template, this is your takeaways, boys and girls. Go ahead, Robert. But that's solution 1 is have a catered to you template. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I just want to color this a little differently as well from the human and emotional perspective, right? So a lot of MSPs like me, right? A lot of listeners out there, we're all really smart people. We know what we're doing. If you challenged any one of us to think about, all right, in an attack, what would you do? You could probably sit and talk through probably some of those things. And I think what that does is it gives us a false sense of security that, well, in the unlikely event, which it's never going to happen to me, right? But if in some weird way I got hit by lightning, I'd still know what to do. And the point is take it from someone who's lived through it. When you're in that moment and you freeze and you are emotionally ruined in those, precious moments, those first minutes, hours, and whatnot, you can't think clearly. I can tell you from experience, you're going to want to have something that you can reference, even if it's not perfect, that it's at least, pretty good, that will get you through the major things that you need to get done.
Yeah, and to add
fight
on
or
to
flight,
that,
right? Like it comes into you humans, all of us, if we're, being threatened to be punched in the face or we're faced with a major, catastrophic cyber attack, we're going to fight or flight, and we get really bad at making small decisions. We cannot do it. It's part of our physiology. So it has to be big actions that our muscles can memorize, right? We're not really thinking analytically about it. We know we need to go get the IR plan. We know where it is, and we know that we need to read that. And that's that's probably close to the extent of what we can figure out when we're in the crosshairs like that.
I think the point I was trying to make is also that, we talk about frameworks, we talk about plans, we talk about tools, we talk about all this great stuff, technology, but it's really like, when it's game time, it's totally different, right? It's like a team making it to the playoffs or the Super Bowl. It's a totally different experience.
100%.
Right? Yeah, and in your day, in most MSPs' daily life, they're not with a high pressure situation. They got to make that field goal to win the game. When it comes to an incident situation, that you have people that are put in that situation that I guarantee you in their lives they've never been in that situation. And I've personally seen it. I've seen guys flake out, quit on the fly. I've seen people get fired. I've seen their relationship with their employer completely just change overnight, just because of the way that situation was handled. So Robert's right. Emotions. And you can't put that in a plan. I mean, you got to run through that stuff. And I don't even know what to do. I mean, you throw them in a haunted house, maybe at Halloween time, and maybe say they got hit by ransomware at the same time. I don't know,
but this is an example, in my opinion, of where tabletopping can help this, right? Because one of the things that you don't think about is in a situation like a mass ransomware incident is that how do you deal with, there are going to be people that will suffer. There are going to be people that we will not get restored quickly. There are going to be people that will fire me. There are going to be relationships that hate me. I will get calls from people that are my friends that I go to lunch with that will tell me they wish they had never met me. I will deal with a level of personal embarrassment, failure, all of that coming together at the same time. So when you say I did this and I'm smart in planning, there's no way to prepare yourself for that cadence of battle, if you will, of that failure, that emotional failure, that human failure. And I've seen it, and I went through it, right? And I think we tend to say, well, we can handle it because we're smart. Let's talk about some of the components of an incident response plan that help solve that pain. And I'll start with one. When you're writing an effective incident response plan, you have a communications section. And in that communications section, you have someone who owns comms. You have someone who's going to own the responsibility of meeting the interface with the customer who is in their worst moments as well. You have someone designated to only say X things that don't put you in legal harm, right? When you look at the president of the United States, no matter which political affiliation it might be at the time, they always have a communications director that reads from the cards of what they're allowed to talk about. Why? Because you can't have as much passion as we have and serve what you have to serve in that moment. You have to have separation. You have to have something to lean on as a crutch that says, this is what I'm going to say. This is what my attorneys, and the more pre-planned that is, where you have a ransomware kit that you pull out and say, we're experiencing massive issues from a threat actor potentially in our network. We are aware of it and under the full capabilities of restoration, and we're assessing, like having comms that just get said over and over, maybe a little bit different way, gives you an armor from having to deal with those emotional conversations right now. And even though it sucks, it's how you cut off the blood loss in an incident, in my opinion. So
and here's a little
having
secret.
a pre-plan,
it's usually
go
not
ahead.
the owner. It's not the owner.
Yes.
You want to be your comms person.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're either going to say the wrong thing or they're not going to shut up. They're just going to keep talking and talking and talking. I've been on that. And it's just, you got to find the person that either has some experience in it or usually is probably the person that just is the best suited to know what to say, when to say it, and when not to say things, right? That's it. Yeah. And then when to go ask permission. I mean, that's it. And a lot of times.
Well, it's also something you can outsource, right? And I think a lot of people miss that.
To a certain extent, right?
It's hard.
You can outsource. Well, I mean, you can outsource somebody consulting, telling you what to say, but having someone else, third party, say it to your clients would be kind of weird. But I get
no. But I mean, someone that can coach you through talking crisis communication.
And usually you'll find it may be somebody that's not their ordinary role. Like, I've been in situations where they may pull somebody out of the finance department because their demeanor is perfectly set for that role in an incident response situation. That might not be their daily life, but that's a great role for them to fill in an incident response situation. Plus, they're not as key in an incident response situation in their current role.
Yeah.
So you can take them out of that and put them in.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Right.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Good call out. Okay. So that's one thing that can make people successful in an incident response. Anybody want to go next on something else as a major category that needs to be in a good IR plan that will help them shield themselves from some of this failure?
Well, I mean, you definitely need to know the third parties that you need to call and how to do it. So one of the big, I'll tell you this little thing, being in the insurance world, when we get a new policy, like a policy written on a new client, we do have the occasion where they say, hey, we want to talk to the IR team and update our plan so it reflects, so we know what we're supposed to do if we have to file a claim. When you talk to those companies and they get on the phone, they get on the Zoom call or whatever, they usually have like 6 or 7 people on there. And do you think those people ever file a claim? Nope. Because they're incredibly prepared, and it's a sign of the maturity of their organization when they do that. But that's just an example of what you got to do. So they want to know, do they call a phone number? Is it best to get on their phone and use an app? I mean, those little things like that, and a who up front, and that you know exactly what it is. I mean, a lot of people might just fill in the legal blank for whatever their attorney is, the general counsel attorney, and that's wrong. And so they never talked to that person and said, hey, look, I'm having an incident. I might call you about this. Their attorney person said, don't call me. You know, you're supposed to call somebody else. So those are very important. And we talked about it earlier, you know, the CompT of Volunteer Response Corps, and that's kind of part of the deal there is that's another number to call if you're an MSP that says there's people on there that can kind of help you calm those emotions and everything. But that's yet another piece of information. So who to call, why you're calling them, and who's going to make those calls is an incredible part of that IR plan. And that's something that you have to keep up to date. Things change, people move, people leave. So that's why this thing, I'll say it this time, but just carry it on throughout this conversation. That IR thing is a living document and needs to be treated as such.
Amen. And the only way it can be a living document is if you're looking at it, pulling it off the shelf, opening it, reading it, and changing it with some delta every year, right? That's the only way it can be that. And I do want to touch on that call out of knowing where and when and what to escalate. In our incident response plan at my former MSP, the first thing I asked was this me? Did I cause this? As a company, do I believe that we caused this? If that first answer is yes, I'm going to go down my insurance path, my counsel, establish my legal privilege, and do my side of things, hire Solis myself to run those things, right? Those are going to be, or whatever my insurance panel requires. But I'm going to know that path. But the second part, if that answer was no, it wasn't me, it changed who my comm director was. It changed who was in charge of the incident. It changed it down to its locality. Was it this office? Was it this org? Was it just one thing? But when you think about that, what came in commonality was the next question was, does that client have a cyber insurance policy or rider, and what is it? And the longer that takes to answer, the longer you should be doing almost nothing but containment, right? And I think that's the other part I wanted to call out, and that is that you cannot start an effective incident with any type of actions until you start figuring out the path you're going to take next. Because how you collect forensics, who you work with, are you allowed to actually restore? If you restore, is it even going to be the right day, or will it be, well, the threat actor's already sitting there and he just gets his shell back up when you start it back up, right? Like you get into those massive pieces of it. So I do want to call out having that written down is critical. And it's something you can do in your QBRs, MSPs. You can ask your customer, do you have cyber insurance? I need to document who we need to call. I want to document the parameters of when we want to actually take an action. And that's going to be a decision on that business owner. Trying to have a decision of whether they call insurance or whether they bring on private incident response or whether they do nothing is up to them. And so my second question was always that. And so I think that's one piece I'd add is have a way to determine who's going to be in charge of this.
And real quick, I know you mentioned the term and maybe a lot of people know, but when he says panel, so each insurance carrier out there has an approved panel of people that they allow to work on their cases. So some panel lists might be small. Some insurance may have a panel of attorneys and a panel of IR firms. Some might just have a panel of law firms that they then engage with the IR firms. If you're big, if you're really big, you can kind of dictate who your IR panel firm is, but that you have to be pretty big and spend a lot of money on insurance to do that. So the point is just to know that those panel firms is a long list. If you have somebody that's on panel, then that's gonna be approved. If you don't, they're gonna assign you somebody. So kind of know that ahead of time. You don't necessarily need to know who's exactly on panel. You just need to know that you can't just go out there and shop your own deal. And I've seen a lot of MSPs these days are now forming relationships with IR firms. Their clients get popped, and they're like, "What?" Their clients call in, and they go, "Hey, well, we already have this IR partner engaged." I'm like, "Well, so what? They're out of here because they're not on panel."
Yeah.
You got to know that stuff. Yeah.
And that's one that hit me, right? And Robert, I'll let you go real quick. But for me, Chris, you just called out a very, very valid point of if you try to go forward on your own, sometimes you're in your own pocket, and sometimes it may not be insurable by the insurer. They'll say, listen, I don't trust that forensics team. We didn't say yes to it. We're not paying it. Robert, go ahead.
And it may not be legally covered, but go ahead, Robert. But it may not be under attorney-client privilege either if you do that. So just keep that. But go ahead, Robert. Yeah.
So there was just a couple of things in there I wanted to address. You started with the question of what are some of the basic things that should be in the IR plan, and I think you touched on a lot of it. But just two different thoughts here. Number one is making sure that within your plan you do that early assessment, right? Like in our particular case, we're pretty convinced forensically that we have enough evidence to support what Chris said earlier about our attack, that there was no data exfiltration, because forensically it was almost physically or they'd have to break the laws of universal physics to have been able to.
At the scale they deployed it, there's not a high level of that
scale and the amount of time that they were in and what all the logs showed, there was just no time to do it. So we were pretty comfortable with that. But within those first couple of days, we had a lot of questions about, well, how long were they there? Whose fault was it? How did they get in? And, until
are they in? Right?
Yeah. Are they in?
Are they really in? Or are they using just this extension of this?
Did we cauterize the wound or not? There was so many things, and there was so much pressure also for us to act, that with counsel, we had to take a deep breath, and here's the magic word, right? Assess that situation. Because if you start making bad decisions or wrong decisions based on wrong information, you're only going to worsen your situation. So that assessment piece to me is really, really important to figure out, what the hell are we dealing with right now before you do anything. The second thing
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I wanted to touch upon that real quick, because I want to gloss over that. There's one thing that's probably a show in itself, but what we're calling that is incident response readiness. And Robert mentioned the fact that they had logs. Most people don't. So MSPs are somewhat fortunate that a lot of those tools that they use have logs. It's not a conscious decision by the MSP. They just happen to have their RMMs, their PSAs, whatever, have good logging, or it's hosted and whoever's handling is logging. But most people don't. And I think that's one huge, huge opportunity for 2023 for MSPs and their clients, and just for companies overall, say, hey, are we ready? Meaning, we have our plan, we tested it, but what about these things like logs and stuff that would make us so much clearer and better from when something really does happen? Somebody can say, this is what happened, this wouldn't happen. Because usually that takes months. If you have good logs, that can take hours or days.
Instant. Or the proof of absence of a log where you have the logs now says that, right? And I'm going to call Phyllis Lee's name. She may pop up on a later show, but Phyllis Lee had a thought behind them when Control 8 is audit log management and Control 17 is incident response. And it's because they assume that in order to mount an effective incident response, you have the data known where it is in Control 3, you have baselines applied in Control 4, you know who should have access to it in Control 5 and 6, and you have it logged, and you know that you have vulnerabilities managed in Control 7 and 8, way before you get to 17, which is incident response. And so I think that is one of those things that just shows how endemically broken MSPs are today. And I don't mean that to put down or to be diminutive. I mean it to be a call to action. MSPs need to get the basics in order so that they can mount a defense. And I think there's a lot of profit to come from it. I think there's a lot of growth to come from it. But what you just said, Chris, is so very important, because if you have the logs, yes, it might hang you. It might prove that you had data egress, but it sure more often than not proves the opposite. And it sure more often than not helps give context as to what happens. So you can feel good enough to say to people within reasonability levels that this didn't have data egress. There was no impact to my user's privacy. There was no impact to my contractual obligations, those type of things, right? So without logs, you can do none of that.
Yeah, and if you don't have it, and maybe they didn't egress, it doesn't matter. It's going to be assumed that they did, because you can't prove otherwise. All right, number 2.
Exactly right.
That was very helpful for us to push back on people who were asking those questions, where we were able to supply that log independent. We actually had 2 different independent analysts look at those log and came to independent answers, and it was the identical answer, right? Here's when it started, here's when it ended, here was the amount of time that it took place, and data. While we can't say with 100% certainty that there was no data exfiltration, do the math, right? Like
there's no evidence said on a large scale.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people, we get in these situations where a lot of people are like, well, can't you just use our internet graphs, our ISP graphs to show that there was no data peaks or spikes or whatever the case. Well, no, it doesn't work that way anymore. I mean, these guys have tools and they can exfiltrate data over time, keep that stuff under the radar. Yeah, that's not hey, my graph shows there was no data exfil. Yeah, that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
The other point I want to make from
go ahead.
The other point I wanted to make from earlier was and I know it sounds really basic, but sometimes it's the basic, you got to get the basics right. And we overlook these things, right? We want to go down a control 18, right away. You invoke
I got
CIS
it. Pen testing. We're ready.
Like I'm way down. No, slow down, get the basics right. Which is why control 1 is inventory, right? Just like, do you even know what you have? But with us, and one thing that sort of hurt us or slowed us down, I should say, was that we did not have things like customer lists on the ready outside of our own systems. So that you guys were talking a bit about communication plans before. Well, who are you going to communicate to? Do you even know who they are? I mean, if you've got 10 customers, you could probably rattle off their phone numbers, cell numbers, home addresses, and everything about them, right? But when you start getting bigger, like, you can't really remember exactly everybody who's on your list. And it's just a while to piecemeal it from different places. And we were able to do it here, but it slowed us down and it was a pain in the ass, right? And there was like 1 or 2 names that like fell through the cracks. So it's really important that that plan be accessible off network someplace. We talk about it being live. We talk about it being updated and frequently accessed and reviewed. But it's got to be someplace where if you're attacked
out of band
or your customer attacked,
right,
that the place that thing is in is not attacked, and that you have enough information to communicate properly with your customer base and fill in whatever other questions you need, which is why the tabletop exercises are so important, right? I love that part of the tabletops where we say, okay, Robert, you're dead. Like, you can't talk. Like, you want to put tape over your mouth, and like everybody in the room now has to.
That's a big piece of tape.
Right.
That is a big piece of tape.
Big piece of gorilla tape.
Listen, San Antonio's not that far from New York.
So I actually I built a gamified version of this real quick, a little segue, but Dom and I've played with this and I built it with Huntress, but it's a gamified version of taking an MSP, 5 people at a table, and each person has a role. So you're owner, you're your head of tech, you're the dispatch person, and they're given these chips. So they have 10 technical resources in a 15-person, $3 million MSP. And everybody's ransomed, and they have to wipe and reload every laptop, as in that legal case that you gave expert witness on, or expert subject matter opinion on, Chris, right? But they have these chips, and it's turn-based, and they can only restore 4 laptops every turn and 2 servers every turn. And so you make them realize that even at 2 weeks, the best game player had only restored 1.2 million of their 3 million in revenue. Right? Even the 2 weeks, they were just at that stage, and we kept giving them bad sandwiches. This backup failed. Oh, wait, this was slow because you didn't count on every backup being restored at once would satisfy too much bandwidth for the people there. And so we take away points. And what I was bringing up for is, you said something, Robert, of if you have a plan and it's living and it's breathing and you have these things and it's updated, it's out of band, I gave them 1 extra black chip. So if they had a plan, I made them more efficient at being able to talk to their customers, at being able to know whether or not Matt just read the news, saw that there was an incident, and started pretending to be your customers and are now calling in. How are you vetting that out of band? How are you doing? And so those kind of things. And so we make people go through it. And I had a guy come up to me after the first time I did it.
Pretty brutal, dude. It
was brutal.
There's some twists and turns in that thing.
And he comes up and he goes, Matt, I am terrified. And I said, that wasn't my intention. But it was to tell you, if you don't act now, that's your real outcome, right? It was Ghost of Christmas Future, right? So anyways, I'm going to release that to everybody that's watching. At some point, I'm going to give that out as shared community content. Me and Huntress built it that way on purpose. It's just not quite ready. But Robert, that kind of tabletopping, to your point, we'll bring it back to you, it's how you get buy-in from the team. It's how you get it to be a living document. It's how you bring people to understand that if I don't do this, this is going to be a real problem, right? And it gets that human buy-in from emotion. But that's a great call out.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as an MSP, right, it is we all know we've got so many competing priorities, right? I've got sales, I got quotes, I've got, I'm behind on some projects. I need to hire some people, whatever it is. I got some broken process I got to go fix. On 20 other things on top of that too, right? I got 4 tools I got to change, before next month. And then we throw in, well, you need to develop an incident response plan and you need to do some tabletop exercises. It doesn't, I think the reason it's not widely adopted is because it's that, I forget that psychological phenomenon. Matt, you're really good with that stuff. I can't remember the term for it. When you,
why? Because he's got psychological problems.
Yes, because there's a lot of that bias that you have where you it'll never
confirmation
happen.
Bias. Confirmation bias or a false set of belief in your own risk. Thing.
But the point is, we always feel like, well, it's not going to happen. Hey, I get that it's important, right? It's like the Eisenhower matrix. I get that this is important. It's just not urgent. So I'm not going to do this, and I'm gonna put it off. So that's unfortunately what I think a lot of my peers are going through. Is even when they hear my story, it's hard to motivate them to take the action. What I would advise, if I can offer any advice, is just put some time in your calendar every month, even if it's an hour. I mean, just an hour, just to set aside for research, for reading, for learning, listening to things like this. And before you know, a year will go by and you put 12 hours into it. Way more, 100%. Infinitely more time than you put into it last year.
Yeah. And it'll give you the context to make a better decision too, right? In some of that. And you'll start applying that down to a customer's incident, not just some massive scale across my org. And you'll start adding value to the customer in ways you hadn't imagined. I think the other piece I'll get back to, and then I want to let Chris beat up on Rackspace if he wants to. But one of the things that I kind of wanted
poor Rackspace.
I kind of wanted to bring it back to is that when you are talking about this, and people go through my cybersecurity class, I do applying CIS controls where I walk through all of the controls. The biggest theme that I've had out of that in that I have great CSATs, but people come out and say, I wanted you to solve this for me, Matt. I thought going through this class would give me a solution. Instead, you've just shown me how I'm not doing 27 things, 40 things. And they walk out almost horrified by the breadth of what they didn't know. But I remember my moment on that. When I took my first cybersecurity class from Joy Beeland in 2016 or something, which I'm dating myself, I'm a young buck, but she scared the hell out of me. I had no plan. I had no policies. I was following no procedures. We had absolutely nothing defined as to how I would run an incident. We had no security protections other than I was smart enough just to put out. And we had no understanding of delivering cybersecurity because we didn't have to. That wasn't what an MSP was doing. We were there just to be more efficient, more profitable, better EBITDA, serve better, have a better customer experience.
Standards.
Yeah. And now those same things will be what get them through this, though. I think those same behaviors and operational excellence that MSPs do display will turn into the acceptance of this, the movement of this, and then just the endemic nature of it being involved in an MSP and what we do. And once that happens, this is a much easier conversation. But let's go back to when it doesn't happen. So Rackspace clearly had not gone through Control 8 with logs, had not gone through Control 14 with backup, had not gone through Control 17 with an incident response plan, and God bless, I bet not 18 with any meaningful reason. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on the incident response plan in the lens of a Rackspace type incident?
Well, it's again, they're in my backyard, San Antonio, Texas, right? And known people have gone to work for them, and it's interesting because they had their big claim was they had this big giant slide. And so part of your deal when you came to Rackspace, if it was your first time, you had to go down this giant slide. And so people go this, that's all cool slide and no dress code. They were all cool. We'd go to an event, a local event, like a VMUG event or whatever. And you'd be there like 1 or 2 people. And all of a sudden like 20 rackers would come in, their flip flops and their cargo shorts and all that. I mean, why do you got 20 people at this thing, man? Everybody else only has 1 or 2. But anyway, there's a slide. Well, I didn't think. I mean, everybody come down the slide. Well, lo and behold, somebody came down the slide one time. And I don't even think it was a racker. I think it was like a salesperson or whatever, a vendor rep. Somebody could get it wrong. Came down, broke her arm. And so I think about that, and they weren't prepared necessarily for that, but obviously they made some changes. But it's no different than this situation as a larger scale. I mean, they didn't think about the risk of having that slide. It was just cool. It was, their differentiator. It's what brought people in the door or whatever. And here, they've been in this exchange business a long time. I mean, these guys, they kind of consider themselves, the godfather of cloud as well. I mean, they were trying to push this concept of cloud data centers way before everybody else was. And with this Exchange stuff, and this stuff was secret, man. This wasn't like the Kaseya thing where no one really knew about it and popped up and surprised you. I mean, this is riddled with issues. I mean, if you're a litigator, this is a pipe dream for you, right? I mean, So it's and so from an incident response situation, the whole thing. I mean, I'll tell you what was really interesting about the situation is the fact that there was no information really known about it. So they weren't as transparent, but at the same time, in the rumor mills, I mean, people were like, "Hey, you're everywhere. What's going on?" And I'm like, "I don't know." I mean, the rumor was it was Play. That was the variant that was involved here, but it never came out. And so there was just really no information. So from that perspective of how tight-lipped and how well sealed that was remarkable. I'll give them that credit.
Yeah,
but from the way
but it's probably only because of the impetus of it, right? The only reason it was that well secreted was because they knew they had conjecture.
Yeah. No, but you're probably right. Yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah. But but I mean, the other side of it is just there were MSPs directly affected because I knew there were smaller ones, but I knew of MSPs that they used.
I know of some of them.
Email.
I know them.
Right.
I know
Darren.
Yeah, I know them well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have this whole issue of you have the ones that MSPs that their customers used them. And I guarantee you none of them had IR plans that would cover this kind of scenario with a third party or fourth party, whatever you want to put it from the MSP's relationship perspective. So I mean, it's a great case study, right? All that kind of stuff. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So, but the only thing I can say is, again, you're right, that there is reasons for it, but the fact that, and they did have a very large, very awesome IR firm involved. That helped them out. Yeah. So, it killed their business. But
even that said, let's take it back to something you said. You said, their IR plan probably wouldn't have covered a fourth party. No, but you know what it would have covered if they did BCP and they went through some business continuity planning, right? Or COOP or continuation of operations planning. That would have been in that same vein of being ready for an incident. Right. That's incident readiness. Back to your point earlier, right? If they were doing those things, they would have had online backup in a separate system of those mail systems. And as soon as they went down, we would have changed the MX record. We'd changed our DNS records and we'd had you back up and restoring EDBs in no time. But that's not what you see unilaterally. You see a mix of that. Did they have Exchange backup or not? Was probably a very low percentage, assuming that the carrier had it. And I think that's another call out. Microsoft, at least, has been very good about saying you are not backed up. Yes, we're highly available. Right. Yes, we have those, but we do not back up your customer data. You better back it up. And so at least you have that preparedness aspect that you didn't have at Rackspace. I don't think there was lines of clear communication of, hey,
I don't think
we
you
do nothing
could
to protect
have
this environment.
backed up your own Rackspace hex data. Like, I don't think, they have their archiving solution. That's not backup. That's archiving. Sure. We can talk those semantics as well. But if you look at the technology that drives hosted Exchange, it is literally Exchange servers with some access control lists around global addresses
and WAFs in front of it, right? Yeah.
Right. And that's why they didn't even have WAFs. If you look at the headers, they didn't even have WAFs in front of it. It was, you were going to Exchange. If you were, that came out with Kevin Beaumont.
Web application firewall
are right there.
Real quick. We haven't used WAF before. So web application
firewall. But anyway, like, there was nothing you could have hooked into that to do your own backups. If you really, maybe PSTs or
without direct server level access or things like that. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep. True story. But to the point I wanted
to make,
no
one probably did a risk assessment on there and identified those risks ever.
There you go. You just stole my point. You get another point, you sorry bastard. You're now at 3 points. I got no points. That's all right though. But as you look at that, those are the things where you need to make sure that even if you have an IR plan, you've called out the contingency of what your response will be. And here's what I mean. When you look at a phase of an incident, you get into this detection phase, and then everybody says, okay, it's respond, recover, and that's it. No, there's actually a containment, a discovery, forensics, eradication, restoration that all come in part of that, right? You have to know, when did the threat actor get a foothold? So if you restored it yesterday when the data was good, you don't restore a foothold for threat actor. You might need to know that last known good time. You might need to go back further. You might need to restore to a certain point. So one of the things that I'd say as a precursor of a good incident response plan is really having the knowledge of where is the sensitive data to business operations, which is back in your risk analysis conversation, right, Chris? What's the value of the data? Which ones are most critical? Where do I need to protect myself the most? Those kind of things. But we have quickly run out of time on this. So I'll give everybody just a second. Robert, you get some closing thoughts here. What could someone do tomorrow to start down this path? And I think you've already given a great nugget about hour a week or hour a month, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reemphasize that point. Just what I would do, it's something that I do. I just did it again as part of my, New Year reboot, is to reorganize my calendar. And I've booked an hour a week for certain types of activities that I'm just, very diligent and methodical about making sure that I stick to that. So I would encourage everybody to carve out some pre-scheduled, scheduled in advance time that you're going to put into furthering your education, making connections, and even get your butt out of your seat and get yourself into some conferences. I don't want to promote any specific ones, but there's tons of them out there. Or there's great resources at Pax8 that you can tune into and subscribe to or buy into or whatever the case may be. But you've got to put the time into this. This is not something that you can just go to a vendor and say, all right, I'll pay you $199 a month, and that's all. It doesn't work that way.
I'll add one more piece, and then I'll let Dom close us out. I'm going to thank you too for being here, Chris and Robert. I get to work with you on a constant basis. I'm always impressed and called to be better by you. So thank you for being here. The piece I'll leave people with is, if you're following a system like Traction, EOS, or other methodologies to build your business, put a rock in there for your incident response plan. Put a rock in there every quarter for something to make you operationally more capable. That's how you get it done. Make it accountable. Dom, why don't you close us out, buddy?
Yeah, well, that is our show. The timers have turned red, so we got to leave. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. This has been a fantastic show. And we need to do something. That's really the call out here. Do something. Next week, we have our very own in-house counsel, Tyler Rowett, joining us. We're going to have some very fun conversations there. Definitely one of my favorite attorneys, and I'm not just saying that because he's our attorney. So don't forget to catch that next week. Don't forget to catch Technically Unraveled next week, and we will see you then. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all that magic algorithm stuff. Catch you later.